Lindemann, and she's going to talk to us about who's unintelligible and the listener's role, the perceiver's role. What a wonderful follow to Adrian.
Hard to follow Adrian because she says all the cool stuff and she even used the same template, but I'll try. I'm really happy about this conference. I'm really excited to be here. I decided for my presentation that I wanted to look at kind of the Arizona policy as best I could and then see the kinds of research that I do, what might it have to say to someone who thinks that it's a pretty good idea. That, oh, this Arizona policy makes a lot of sense, so what would my research have to say to that? So the first thing I ran into is I couldn't find out about the Arizona policy, and we heard a little bit about that yesterday, the difficulty of finding more information out about it. This was interesting. The conference website has a bunch of helpful links, and this is from one of those helpful links. In one news story, we have a headline, those are always the most exciting, that says, "English teachers cannot have accent." And then the newscaster, because it was a video, said English teachers can't have a heavy accent. And then it goes to the actual video with the superintendent, and what he said was English teachers should be proficient in English. So it gets a little hard to say, what are we talking about here? These are really very different issues. So I just wanted to start by saying, well, we need to be a little cautious whenever we're looking at non-specialist discussion, because we have all these terms that are not defined. So people are just kind of throwing words around as if they're all the same thing, and they're really not. And even when people are using the same term, like proficient, we can have very different ideas what that means. So of these things, I would say the first one, the headline, seems the most crazy and just not, good, from a linguist point of view, good luck with that, since if you say everybody has an accent. Whereas the last one, it's kind of like, well, okay, they need to have some proficiency in English. That it's not entirely crazy to say that somebody who teaches English should be proficient. But then the question is, what counts as not proficient? And so this is from the same video. Superintendent Horn said, if your grammar's bad, if you mispronounce words to the extent that they sound like other words, you shouldn't be teaching kids English. And actually, I do think that the grammar part is very interesting, and I would love to talk about that, but my own research is more on the pronunciation part, so I'm going to be talking about this, and I'll come back to this actually at the end. And then this one is actually from the classroom protocol that people, when they go into classrooms to observe teachers in Arizona, one of the things that they have to check off is whether or not the teacher has, quote, accurate, I think it's accurate is the word, accurate pronunciation. And so these are two things that would result in a no answer. So if the teacher, if there's some message that is incomprehensible in English, that would mean that they are not proficient, or if there are words used that are impeding communication. So of all these different descriptions of what the teachers are supposed to be able to do or not have problems with, I would say saying that they can't have an accent is the one that even Superintendent Horn seems to realize is not completely cool. Whereas if you say something like, well, if the teacher is incomprehensible, that seems pretty clear that they shouldn't be teaching English if they're not comprehensible themselves. So I'm going to actually take that one and say, what does my research have to say about that? I think while it seems pretty obvious and straightforward whether somebody is incomprehensible or mispronounces words to the extent that they sound like other words, the listener actually plays an important role in assessment and even performance of the non-native speaker. So the emphasis here on the teacher means that we're actually taking the teacher in isolation, pretending that there's not some sort of listener involved here. And so I'll be talking about research on attitudes to non-native speakers and also expectations about non-native speakers. And I think these will show that it's pretty problematic to do this kind of informal assessment of English proficiency, to just say, well, they said this word and it was confusing, something like that. So I'm going to start by talking about listener attitudes and the study I did on the relationship between attitudes to Korean non-native speakers of English and comprehension of those speakers. So I wanted to see, okay, we've heard a lot about the proficiency of the speaker and how well they speak. What about the role that's played by the person who's listening? So I, first of all, had to measure attitudes, and actually we heard a lot about how we do that yesterday with the matched guys procedure. I used something similar, except I had different speakers. So I have speakers of Korean, native speakers of Korean, native speakers of English. All of them are recorded saying exactly the same thing. And then I asked people to say, well, how smart did this Korean, I didn't say how smart does this Korean sound. How smart does this person sound? How nice are they? Don't want to give it away. How nice are they to listen to? Those kinds of things. And what I found overall, of course, is that, of course, I mean, it's just not surprising, was that most people rated the native English speakers as being smarter, nicer to listen to, and so forth, and the Korean speakers lower on those qualities. But I had some people who rated like all of the native English speakers are up here, you know, they're all smart and nice to listen to, and then all the Korean speakers are way down here somewhere. There were others where they were much closer together. So I'm calling the negative attitude people the ones where it's like, whew, American good, Korean bad. That's kind of what I'm going to be calling negative attitude participants. And then the positive attitude participants are ones where they're at least a lot closer. So they're rated more similarly, where they're not making big judgments about intelligence based on whether they're a native speaker of English or not. So then, once I had measured people's attitude, I had them complete a task with a native speaker of Korean in English. And in this task, it's kind of an experimental an experimental setup, so we can really kind of pinpoint what's going on here. So in this task, both people get a map of the same imaginary place, but only the non-native speaker's map has a route drawn on it. So actually I'm going to skip ahead. Here's the map and what it looks like. I hope you appreciate my lovely artwork. That's what the native speaker of Korean would get, so I'm just going to call them the non-native speaker. The native speaker of English would get a very similar one with no route. And actually I'll put these up together to compare them. The stuff in blue is on the non-native speaker's map only. The stuff in red was just on the native speaker's map. So there's some differences here. And the idea behind this is the non-native speaker needs to tell the native speaker how to draw the route on their map so that the native speaker, who starts with a map like this, ends up with a map as close as possible to that. Okay? Now, part of the key here is they can't look at each other's maps.